Guys, welcome to part 6. Guys, let me give you a quick recap because I've lost a lot of track when it comes to this tutorial. So this is the very first original piece I ever made, and this is the design, okay, that we were working on previously on part 5. Okay, so what happens is that when we are working with the bubble stitch, we chain and then we single crochet right in the middle. Okay, and then we are making the bubble stitch, and as time goes by, the mesh stitch depreciates and the bubble stitch come together until we do the very last one over here. So afterwards, you do 2 rows of mesh stitch, and then you do a row of double crochet stitch, and then we move to the next sector, which I'll be teaching you right here on my yellow dress. Okay, so I'm working on this project specifically to make some changes as time goes by, because I'm participating in a contest that my crochet sisters are also participating. It's called the Saint and Sinners Project. I'll be leaving a link to the information. I'll be telling you more about it in the description box, but let's just focus on this tutorial. Okay, so I've made the very first instance. Okay, so we are now concentrating on this V bubble, this zigzag bubble feature. Okay, as you can see in the lace pattern, that's what I'm doing, but I just made the very first instance because I don't want this tutorial to be extremely long. So the next one I'm going to teach you, please don't get confused, is the same thing. Okay, but we are going to repeat the zigzag as time goes by. Do you get it? So I've done the first one already here. So this is the very first zigzag. This is the second one. This is the very first one I've made. So I'm going to teach you how I made the second one. So as you progress, you are going to repeat it twice and you are done. And then we finally finish with joining the lace detail at the edge. Okay, so this is very simple. Let's continue. Enough of the talking. So a little background information before we continue. Okay, this bubble stitch mesh design is made of 9 chain spaces and then a repetition of 1 bubble. So for the very first row, when I began, I made a bubble and I made 9 chain spaces in between, which is the mesh stitch, before the next bubble follows in the following mesh stitch. Okay, so that's the repetition I made. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate to you. Okay, so since we are making the very second one, zigzag, I make sure I start in the exact middle of the previous bubble, the beginning of the very first bubble. I hope you get it. So I'm just placing my stitch marker to realize that this corresponds. So this is the middle. That's where I'm going to start. Let's just grab a yarn and begin the process. So we are going to make a slip knot, and then we are going to make your very first bubble in the very first chain space. So as usual, we put a total of 5 double crochets in the chain space, and then you slip stitch in the very first double crochet you made. So just slip stitch like this to get this corner space, and then you add an extra double crochet in the same chain space. Okay, so that's the bubble. That's a fair reminder of how to make the bubble. Okay, and as I told you, there are always 9 chain spaces in between each bubble. So this is how the demonstration goes. Afterwards, we are going to chain 1, move right directly on top of the next, not the same exact double crochet, but the next. Okay, please take notice. Skip this double crochet, the exact one that you made the bubble stitch inside. Do not double crochet right on it. Go to the next, put a double crochet over there. Okay, I hope you are getting it. You chain 1, move to the next. So this is 1 mesh stitch, this is the second one. So 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9. So this is the last mesh. Okay, so I've made 9 mesh details, as you can see. In the next space, we are going to put a total of 5 double crochets. So 1, and then 2, and then 3, 4, and then 5. Now what you are going to do is that you are going to take your hook, go to the very first double crochet you made. Okay, the very first double crochet you made for the 5 double crochet, insert your hook and then slip stitch. Okay, afterwards you add an extra double crochet right in the same space. Okay, just to complete the bubble. Okay, so you see that this detail, so this is so easy. Okay, very easy. Okay, make sure you have 9 mesh stitches in between each bubble. And since we made the very first detail, which I failed to show you because I was having some technical issues, since we did the first one, we started right in the middle, okay, of the V. That's the only difference with this. But when you are starting regular with the mesh stitch, you can start anyhow, making sure that each bubble you make, you have a total of 9 what? 9 mesh stitches in between. I hope you guys get it. Exactly. So let's continue. Okay, let's continue. After your bubble, let me make one demonstration. I'll end and then we begin the next row. After the bubble, you chain 1, move to the next, right on top of the next, you double crochet. So this is the first one. You always count it in your head. So 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9. This is the last one. What do you do in the next space? You do your bubble. Okay, you go back to the very first stitch you did, you slip stitch and add an extra one. Exactly. So I'm just going to meet you at the end where we started, where I have my stitch marker, and I'll show you. Almost at the end, this is the last mesh stitch I did. I'm just going to chain 1 and slip stitch in the bubble stitch. Okay, so for the next section we are going to chain 4. In the next space, put a total of 5 double. So just go into the next mesh space and put a total of 5 double crochets. Slip stitch into the very first double crochet you made for this cluster, and then add an extra double crochet, making a total of 6. Okay, so afterwards you are going to repeat the same mesh stitch until you approach the next bubble stitch. So let's do it. Chain 1 on top of the next double crochet, double crochet, chain 1 on top, you double crochet, chain 1, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. So we are gradually getting to the popcorn stitch. Okay, so after this you realize that there's one box left. Inside we are going to put a total of 5 double crochets. and then inside the very first double crochet you are going to slip stitch and then add an extra double crochet. Afterwards you are going to chain 1, skip the whole popcorn stitch. On the edge of the popcorn stitch, double crochet, and then go back inside the next piece with a total of 5. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. Okay, so you go back, do your regular slip stitch into the very first, add an extra 1, and then this is what you're supposed to have. Okay, you chain 1, move to the next double crochet, put a double crochet there, and take notice that you are not putting a double crochet in the very chain space that you made the bubble stitch. Please take notice. Okay, chain 1, move to the next, a double crochet, chain 1, move to the next, double crochet, chain 1, move to the next. I'm sorry if I'm moving a little bit fast. Okay, chain 1, double crochet, move to the next, chain 1, double crochet, move to the next, and then chain 1. This is going to be your last double crochet. You realize that there's 1 space left. Okay, so just put your double crochet on the next chain and you realize that there's 1 vacant space. Okay, what you are going to do is that go into that vacant space and put a total of 5 double crochets. Okay, so that's how it's gonna be, and then slip stitch to the very first double crochet you made and then add an extra double crochet in the same chain space. Okay, afterwards we are going to chain 1, move to, just skip the bubble detail and then go to the very last double crochet that you made for the bubble detail. Right on top of it, put a double crochet there, and now in the next page you are going to put a total of 5, just as we just it's just the same demonstration I just showed you. So a total of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. Okay, and then you slip stitch into the very first double crochet you made and then add an extra as usual in the same space. Okay, so are you taking notice of this? This is the same exact detail we are making, this V bubble detail. Okay, so we have started it right in the middle, separating them by chain spaces. That is the detail we are making. Okay, so we are on the second row for this detail. Okay, we already made the very first detail, so it's easy to make a reference. So you realize that the bubble stitches are spreading. Okay, so the next bubble stitch will be definitely made in the space before this stitch. Okay, and then you followed by the chain spaces. So you realize that as the bubble stitches expand, as you can see, the chain spaces in the middle also expand. So realize that there were 3 chain spaces. It will move to 5 and then to 7. So there's additional of 2 stitches in each row when it comes to the middle detail of the chain spaces. Okay, and then the bubble stitch spreads evenly. This is just a very cool detail and I think it's very easy. Okay, and yeah, I'm just going to repeat. I've made 3 demonstrations for you. So with the beginning, we didn't do a bubble stitch. We started with a chain because we are going back. Okay, when we are about to end, we end with a bubble stitch before we slip stitch to join. I will show you how I end. Please continue with this repetition as I showed you, and I'll meet you at the end of the row. Alright guys, we are getting to the end of the row, and for this row I've After chaining one, right on top of the next double crochet, you are going to put a double crochet on top, and before you end, you are going to do a bubble stitch. So inside the space, which is the exact last piece, you are going to put a total of 5 double crochets. And then slip stitch, and then add an extra one as usual. Now we are going to slip stitch into the third piece of the very first chain 4 you made for the beginning of the row. This is what you are supposed to have, okay? So let's move on to the next row. For the next row, you are going to chain 4 as usual. Move directly on the very first stitch for the bubble and put a double crochet there. Chain 1. Move directly into the next space and put a total of 5 double crochets over there. So you are going in the chain space, the one exactly after the bubble. Afterwards, you are going to insert your hook into the very first stitch for the bubble and slip stitch to join, and then add an extra one as usual. You should have the bubble like this. Okay, so this is the first instance. Let's continue. So we are going to make sure that we repeat the stitches in the bubble. So I went ahead to do the mesh stitches right on top. As you can see, I stop at the last but one space, and in that space I put a total of 5 double crochets. And then as usual, I insert my hook into the very first stitch, slip stitch to get this nature, and then add an extra double crochet. Afterwards, I'm going to chain 1, move to the next, and then put a double crochet, chain 1, move to the next and put a double crochet, chain 1, move to the next, and then put a double crochet, put 5 double crochets in the space. So directly in the space after the bubble, you repeat your 5 double crochets, and then you slip stitch as usual and add an extra double crochet. So you should have something like this, okay? So you realize that the V is expanding as the chain spaces depreciate. That is what we are going to repeat simultaneously for each row. So getting to the end of the row, I'm going to repeat my last bubble in the last space of the row. As usual, you are going to put a total of 5 double crochets in that exact space, and then you slip stitch inside the very first double crochet you made for the bubble, and then add an extra double crochet. Afterwards, you are going to chain 1 and then slip stitch into the third space for the chain 4 you made for the beginning of the row. So you should have something like this, okay? So let's move on to the next row. We are going to chain a total of 4, move to on top of the next double crochet, put a double crochet there. You should have something like this. Chain 1, move to the next stitch, put a double crochet there, chain 1, move to the vacant space after the bubble right there, and we are going to place your total of 5 double crochets. Anyway, guys, please don't forget to subscribe if you have not, and also I'll be giving you some important information in the description, so please check it out. After the 5 double crochet, you slip stitch as usual and add an extra double crochet to finalize the bubble. Afterwards, you chain 1, move to the next double crochet and put a double crochet there. Chain 1, move to the next double crochet, chain 1, move to the next stitch, double crochet. And now let's move directly into the space before the bubble, and that is when you are going to put your total of 5 double crochet in that vacant space. Now you are going to slip stitch in the very first double crochet and add an extra double crochet in the space. So afterwards, you know what to do. You chain 1, move to the next stitch right on top of the bubble, double crochet, chain 1, move to the next stitch on top, you double crochet, chain 1, move to the next stitch, you double crochet, chain 1, move on top of the bubble, you double crochet, and now it's finally chain 1, and then in the vacant space after the bubble you are going to put your total of 5 double crochets. And as usual, you insert your hook back in the very first stitch of the cluster of 5 double crochets, as you can see, and then slip stitch nicely and then add an extra double crochet. Okay, so this is how the design is. You are going to repeat this simultaneously in each sector till you get to the end of the row. I'll meet you when we are finally at the end. So I finally did my very last bubble, and finally then I slip stitch to join as usual, as I've been teaching you. To begin the row, you always chain 4 and then move to the next stitch and put your double crochet on top of it. Afterwards, you chain 1, you move to the next stitch, double crochet, you chain 1, move to the bubble sector, double crochet on top of it, you chain 1, move to the vacant space after the bubble, and place your total of 5 double crochets. Afterwards, you are going to insert your hook into the very first stitch you made for the 5 double crochet clusters, slip stitch and add an extra one as usual. Chain 1, move to the next, over the double crochet. Finally, you are meeting your next sector. So now go to the vacant space before the bubble and put a total of 5 double crochets. As usual, you slip stitch and add an extra one, as I've been teaching you throughout this video. Okay, this is very simple. Afterwards, you chain 1, repeat your mesh stitch until you get to the vacant space after the bubble, where you are going to make another bubble of 5 double crochet cluster repetition and slip stitching, and also adding an extra one. This is pretty simple and pretty easy, so I'm going to leave you to it. Just observe and make sure you have the right count. Okay, so yeah, I'm getting to the bubble. Okay, so it's always the vacant space after the bubble. Okay, that's where you repeat the bubble. You realize that the V moves, the V bubble design you are making together with the mesh moves with this rhythmic pattern. So that's what we're achieving in this dress sector. So afterwards, you add an extra double crochet after slip stitching, make sure you do that. And then there's going to be the next vacant space that we make a bubble stitch. You go ahead with your mesh until you meet the next vacant space. I'll meet you at the end of the row. Let me zoom in so you see the rhythmic pattern I'm talking about. So yeah, I'll meet you at the end of the row and then we continue. Finally, at the end of the row, this is what we are supposed to have. You realize that there are now one vacant spaces in between all the separate mesh details. Okay, so I did my last bubble and then I did my last slip stitch after my chain one. Okay, afterwards you chain 4 as usual, move directly on top of the next double crochet, chain 1, move to the next double crochet, chain 1, move to the next double crochet, chain 1, move right on top of the bubble, double crochet, chain 1. The last vacant space for the bubble, we are going to put a total of 5 double crochets, and then afterwards you are going to slip stitch and add an extra one as I've been teaching you. Pretty easy. This is going to be the last stitch, bubble stitch design. Okay, because this is the last vacant space in between each V, and that's what you're supposed to have. Okay, so afterwards you chain 1, move directly on top of the next stitch and double crochet. So I'm going to chain 1 double crochet or repeat the mesh stitch until you meet the last vacant space in between the separate bubbles. I hope you get it. That's the rhythmic pattern we are trying to achieve with this design or sector. So yeah, just move along with the flow. Just regular mesh stitches until you meet the 2 bubbles which are about to intersect. You finally connect the last space with your bubble. Okay, so we are now at the next, almost at the next bubble. So this is the space that we are going to put your total of 5 double crochets in between the 2 bubbles to finally connect it. So after the 5, remember to always slip stitch and then add an extra one. So as you can see, I'm slip stitching and adding an extra one until I make the mesh design and then meet in between the bubbles. So I'm finally connecting the V for it to be complete, the separate V bubble stitch design. So let me get a little bit clarification. So after this row, you are going to make a row of mesh stitches only. Okay, so I'm trying to put the stitch markers where the bubble happens so that you know exactly what to do. That is where you make the bubbles. Please go ahead, repeat it for each part, and then go ahead with the next row, which is the mesh stitch, and then afterwards you go ahead with another row of normal double crochet as I did previously. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to show you here. Okay, it's pretty easy. You should know about the basic mesh stitch by now. I've demonstrated it to you. So after this row, you will slip stitch and join and chain 4. Begin your only row of mesh designs. Afterwards, go along with the final part where I join the square detail, and then I finally wrap up this project. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the very last part of this tutorial. It's been fun crocheting this. So yeah, I'll meet you there.